She was invisible. Just another face in a black uniform, refilling water glasses for people who would never remember her name. But in 30 seconds, she would whisper 6 words to a billionaire that would stop a $120 million disaster. Those 6 words would cost her everything she knew, and give her everything she'd ever dreamed of. This is her story. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at the invisible people around you the same way again. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you a story about a moment that changed 2 lives forever. It's a story about pride, courage, and the incredible power of speaking up when everything inside you is screaming to stay quiet. His name was Daniel Carter, and if you lived in New York City, you knew that name. Daniel wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of wealthy that makes regular rich people feel poor. At 47 years old, he had built Carter Global from nothing into an empire. Real estate, luxury hotels, high-end restaurants across 3 continents. The man had the Midas touch, and everyone knew it. People would point him out on the street. Business magazines put his face on their covers. Young entrepreneurs studied his every move, hoping to capture even a fraction of his success. And Daniel, he wore it all like a perfectly tailored suit. Confidence radiated from him like heat from the sun. But here's the thing about success that nobody tells you. When you're always right, when every decision you make turns to gold, when people hang on your every word like it's gospel, something happens to you. You start to believe you can't be wrong. You start to think you're untouchable. And that's exactly where Daniel Carter found himself on that rainy Tuesday evening in Manhattan. The Peninsula Hotel had outdone itself. The grand ballroom on the 15th floor looked like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables draped in white linen. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city lights twinkling in the rain. This wasn't just any meeting. This was the meeting. The one Daniel had been working toward for 3 years. Sitting across from him were the Yamamoto brothers from Tokyo, 2 of the most influential property developers in Asia. They had flown halfway around the world for this moment. The deal on the table? A staggering $120 million to build a chain of luxury eco-resorts across Southeast Asia. It would be the crowning achievement of Daniel's career. The thing people would remember him for long after he was gone. The room buzzed with energy. Lawyers shuffled papers. Assistants whispered into phones. Investors in expensive suits sipped wine and tried to look casual, even though everyone in that room knew they were witnessing history. Daniel stood at the head of the table, his presentation glowing on a massive screen behind him. He was in his element. This was his stage. He clicked to the next slide, showing the architectural plans for the first resort. Sustainable bamboo construction. Solar panels integrated into the design. Rainwater collection systems. Everything the modern luxury traveler wanted. Everything that said, I care about the planet, but I'm not giving up my comfort. As you can see, gentlemen, Daniel said, his voice smooth and confident, we're not just building hotels. We're building the future of luxury travel. Every calculation has been triple-checked. Every permit is in place. Every contractor is on standby. We're ready to break ground the moment ink hits paper. Mr. Yamamoto, the older brother, nodded slowly. His face was unreadable, but his translator was scribbling notes furiously. The younger Yamamoto brother leaned forward, studying the numbers on the screen with sharp eyes. Daniel felt the familiar rush of victory. He could taste it. In less than an hour, he'd be shaking hands and popping champagne. In less than a day, the news would spread across every business channel. Daniel Carter had done it again. He didn't notice the young woman in the black vest and bow tie who slipped quietly between the tables, refilling water glasses. She was practically invisible, just part of the scenery, part of the machine that kept these high-level meetings running smoothly. Her job was simple: stay quiet, stay out of the way, and make sure no one's glass stayed empty for long. Her name was Lily Zhang, and she was exhausted. This was her second job. By day, she worked at a community center in Queens, helping immigrant families navigate the system. By night, she picked up catering shifts at fancy hotels like this one, serving people who spent more on wine in one evening than she made in a month. The money was good, better than good. She needed every penny. But Lily wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not serving water to billionaires while they made deals that could change the world. She was supposed to be changing the world herself. Just 2 years ago, she had been weeks away from finishing her master's degree in environmental engineering. Top of her class. Job offers coming in. The future wide open in front of her like an endless highway. Then her mother got sick. Cancer, stage 3. The medical bills came like a tsunami, drowning everything in their path. Lily made a choice. She left school, took care of her mom, worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on and pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Her dreams? She packed those away in a box labeled someday and shoved it in the back of her mind. Now here she was, pouring sparkling water for people who would never even look at her face. And she had made peace with that. Really, she had. This was life. You do what you have to do for the people you love. No regrets. She approached Daniel's table with her pitcher, moving like a ghost. But as she reached over to fill his glass, something caught her eye. The presentation on the screen. Numbers. Calculations. Building specifications. Her heart started beating faster. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. Because Lily Zhang might have been wearing a server's uniform, but her brain was still the brain of an engineer. And those numbers? Those beautiful, precise numbers that Daniel Carter was so confident about? They were wrong. Lily's hand trembled slightly as she poured the water. She kept her eyes down, trying to mind her own business. This wasn't her problem. These weren't her numbers. She was just the help. Just someone passing through on her way to somewhere else. But the numbers wouldn't leave her alone. They screamed at her from the screen like a fire alarm only she could hear. The load-bearing calculations for the bamboo structure. The stress ratios. The weight distribution. Daniel had made an error in the foundation specifications. It was subtle. The kind of mistake that someone without specialized training might never catch. But it was there, and it was serious. If they built according to these plans, the structure wouldn't hold. Not in the typhoon season that hit that region every year. Not with the kind of heavy tropical rains that could dump 10 inches of water in a single night. The resorts wouldn't just fail. They would collapse. Maybe not right away. Maybe not even in the first year. But eventually, when the weather turned bad enough, those beautiful eco-resorts would come crashing down. And people would get hurt. Maybe worse. Lily finished pouring and started to move away. It's not your place, she told herself. You're nobody here. Nobody's going to listen to you. You'll just embarrass yourself and probably lose this job too. Keep your mouth shut. Walk away. Let the educated people handle their educated problems. She made it 3 steps before she stopped. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. The same voice that had pushed her to apply to engineering school in the first place. Even when everyone said it was too hard, too competitive, too much for a girl from their neighborhood. Her mother had always said, if you see something wrong and you say nothing, you become part of the wrong. Lily turned around. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Daniel was still talking, gesturing confidently at the screen. The Yamamoto brothers were nodding. Papers were being arranged. Pens were being uncapped. This deal was seconds away from happening. She walked back to the table. Every step felt like moving through concrete. The voices in her head screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to save herself from the humiliation that was about to come. But her feet kept moving forward. She leaned in close to Daniel's shoulder, close enough that no one else could hear. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she said 6 words that would change everything. Sir, your foundation calculations are wrong. Time seemed to stop. Daniel froze mid-sentence, his hand still pointing at the screen. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head to look at her. His expression was a mix of confusion and irritation, like he'd just been interrupted by a mosquito that had somehow learned to speak. Excuse me? His voice was cold. Sharp. The voice of a man who was not used to being contradicted, especially not by someone wearing a server's uniform. Every eye in the room turned to Lily. She felt her face flush hot. The younger Yamamoto brother raised an eyebrow. One of the lawyers actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made Lily want to disappear into the floor. But she'd come this far. She couldn't stop now. Her voice shook, but she pushed the words out anyway. The bamboo stress ratios. You've calculated them for dry conditions, but you haven't factored in the moisture absorption during monsoon season. The structure will weaken by nearly 30% when saturated. The foundation specs won't hold. The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. One of Daniel's assistants, a young man in a suit that probably cost more than Lily made in 3 months, actually rolled his eyes. Are we really taking engineering advice from the catering staff now? He said loudly, to more nervous chuckles. Daniel's face had gone from irritated to something darker. His jaw clenched. This was his moment, his crowning achievement, and it was being interrupted by a waitress with opinions. In front of the most important clients he'd ever had. "Miss," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "I appreciate your concern, but I have a team of the best structural engineers in the country. These plans have been reviewed and approved by every relevant authority. I think we know what we're doing." He turned back to the Yamamoto brothers with an apologetic smile. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Now, if we can return to—" "Wait." The older Yamamoto brother held up his hand. His face was serious, his eyes sharp. Through his translator, he said, "What the young lady says. Is it possible?" The room went quiet. Daniel's smile flickered. "I can assure you, Mr. Yamamoto. I would like to hear what she has to say," the older Yamamoto said firmly. His brother nodded in agreement. And just like that, every eye in that expensive ballroom was on Lily Zhang. Not as the invisible server. Not as the help. But as someone who might know something they didn't. Lily's hands were shaking so badly, she had to set down the water pitcher on the nearest table. Her mouth felt dry. Her mind raced. This was insane. These were some of the most powerful people in the city, maybe the country. Who was she to tell them they were wrong? But then she thought about those resorts filled with families. With children. With people who trusted that the buildings they stayed in were safe. And she thought about her mother, who taught her that having knowledge meant having responsibility. So Lily took a deep breath and began to speak. Lily's voice was soft at first, barely audible over the rain pattering against the windows. But as she talked, as she fell into the familiar rhythm of explaining something she understood deeply, her voice grew stronger. "Bamboo is an incredible building material," she began, her hands moving as she spoke. "It's flexible, sustainable, grows fast. But it's also hygroscopic. That means it absorbs moisture from the air. In tropical climates during monsoon season, bamboo can increase in weight by 20 to 30% as it soaks up water." She moved closer to the screen, pointing at the specifications with a trembling finger. "Your calculations here are based on the dry weight and dry stress capacity of the bamboo. But when these structures sit through 3 months of daily rainfall, that bamboo is going to get heavy. Really heavy. And wet bamboo doesn't have the same tensile strength as dry bamboo." Daniel stood there frozen. His face had gone from angry to uncertain. One of his engineers, an older man with glasses, had pulled out his phone and was frantically typing. Lily continued, gaining confidence. "And your foundation, these concrete piers? They're spaced based on the original calculations. But once that bamboo structure gains all that water weight, especially in a storm with high winds, the lateral force on these piers will exceed their design capacity by at least 40%. The engineer with the glasses looked up from his phone. His face had gone pale. She might be right. The original engineering firm we consulted, they're based in California. They don't have experience with tropical monsoon conditions." Daniel's confident expression crumbled. He turned back to the screen, really looking at the numbers for the first time with fresh eyes. Lily watched as understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by horror. If this deal had gone through, if they had built these resorts based on these plans, if a typhoon had hit in the first year of operation. The younger Yamamoto brother spoke in rapid Japanese to his brother. The translator looked nervous. Finally, the older Yamamoto said, "Mr. Carter, I think we need to pause these proceedings. We need to have these calculations reviewed by specialists in tropical construction." Daniel looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His dream deal, his crowning achievement, was falling apart right in front of him. And it was all because a waitress had spoken up. But then something happened that surprised everyone in that room, including Daniel himself. Instead of getting angry, instead of defending his mistake, instead of doubling down on his pride, he did something he hadn't done in years. He listened. Daniel turned to Lily, and this time when he looked at her, he really saw her. Not the uniform, not the interruption, but the person. The person who had just potentially saved his reputation, saved his company, and quite possibly saved lives. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lily. Lily Zhang." "Lily," Daniel said, and his voice had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. The irritation was gone. What remained was something humble, something human. "How do you know all this?" Lily swallowed hard. "I was an environmental engineering student. I specialized in sustainable building in challenging climates. I was finishing my master's thesis on bamboo construction in tropical regions when..." She trailed off, not wanting to share her personal story with a room full of strangers. But the older Yamamoto brother leaned forward, his eyes kind. When what? Lily's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't cried about this in months. She'd taught herself to be tough, to push through, to not feel sorry for herself. But something about this moment, about being truly seen for the first time in 2 years, broke something open inside her. When my mother got sick, she said softly, I had to leave school, had to take care of her, had to work. The degree, it just became impossible. The room was completely silent now. Even the lawyers had stopped shuffling papers. Outside, the rain fell harder, streaking down the windows like tears. Daniel stood there, processing everything. His assistant, the one who had mocked Lily earlier, now looked deeply uncomfortable, staring at his expensive shoes. The Yamamoto brothers exchanged a long look. Finally, Daniel spoke. Lily, would you be willing to consult with our engineering team? Tonight, if possible? We need to correct these plans before we can move forward with any agreement. Lily blinked in surprise. Yes, of course. Daniel turned to the Yamamoto brothers. Gentlemen, I apologize for this error. It's inexcusable. But I'm grateful it was caught before it became a catastrophe. Would you be willing to give us 1 week to revise the plans with proper tropical engineering specifications? The older Yamamoto smiled for the first time that evening. Mr. Carter, in our culture, we have great respect for someone who can admit mistakes. And we have even greater respect for those with the courage to speak truth to power. He nodded toward Lily. Your waitress has shown more wisdom than many executives we have met. Yes, we will wait 1 week. As the meeting broke up, as the lawyers began making phone calls and the engineers huddled around laptops, Daniel approached Lily. She was standing by the window, watching the rain, still processing what had just happened. Lily, Daniel said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She turned to face him, nervous about what was coming next. That mother of yours, he continued, his voice gentle. Is she okay now? Lily smiled, a real smile this time. She's in remission. 3 months clear. The doctors are optimistic. Good, Daniel said. That's good, because I have a proposition for you, and I need you to think about it carefully. The catering manager was frantically waving at Lily from across the room. She had abandoned her post, broken every rule in the book, and was probably seconds away from being fired. But she couldn't seem to care. Not right now. Not with Daniel Carter looking at her like she was the most important person in the building. What kind of proposition? Lily asked, her voice cautious. She'd learned the hard way that life didn't hand out free gifts. There was always a catch. Daniel gestured to a quiet corner away from the chaos of lawyers and engineers scrambling to salvage the deal. They sat down at a small table, and for the first time that evening, Daniel Carter looked uncertain. Vulnerable, even. I've spent 20 years building this company, he began. 20 years making deals, managing properties, expanding across continents. And in all that time, I've surrounded myself with the best people money can buy. The smartest consultants. The most experienced engineers. People with degrees from the top schools in the world. He paused, looking out at the rainy city beyond the windows. And tonight, not a single one of them caught a mistake that could have destroyed everything I've built. But you did. A grad student working as a server caught what teams of experts missed. Lily shifted uncomfortably. I just happened to see it. It was my specific area of study. Lucky timing, really. No, Daniel said firmly. It wasn't luck. You saw it because you have the knowledge. But more importantly, you said something because you have the courage. Do you know how rare that is? People with knowledge are everywhere. But people who will speak up when it matters, who will risk embarrassment or rejection to do what's right, those people are precious. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. I want you to come work for Carter Global. Not as a consultant. Not as some temporary fix. I want you on my team permanently. As a senior environmental engineer, heading up sustainable development for all our properties. Lily's heart stopped. She must have heard him wrong. I don't have my degree. I never finished. Then we'll finish it, Daniel said simply. The company will pay for you to complete your master's program. Whatever school you want, whatever schedule works for you. And you'll work for us at the same time, full salary, full benefits, applying what you learn in real-world projects. Tears sprang to Lily's eyes. She tried to blink them away, but they came too fast. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Daniel smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Because tonight you taught me something I'd forgotten. You reminded me that brilliance doesn't always come in the package we expect. It doesn't always have the right degrees or the right connections or the right background. Sometimes it's wearing a server's uniform and pouring water. Sometimes it's someone we'd normally never even see. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth. I've spent my whole career believing I was the smartest person in every room. That my success meant I had all the answers. Tonight, you showed me how dangerous that kind of thinking is. You humbled me, Lily. And you saved me. I'm not going to forget that. Lily wiped at her eyes, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Daniel said gently. Say yes to finishing your education. Say yes to doing the work you were meant to do. Say yes to never having to choose between your dreams and taking care of the people you love. Before Lily could respond, the older Yamamoto brother approached their table. He bowed slightly to Lily, a gesture of deep respect. Miss Zhang, my brother and I would like to make a request. Lily stood quickly, nearly knocking over her chair. Of course, sir. We would like you to be the lead environmental consultant on this resort project. We trust Mr. Carter's judgment, but after tonight, we trust your expertise even more. Would you be willing to oversee all the environmental and structural sustainability aspects of the development? Lily looked from Mr. Yamamoto to Daniel and back again. Her mind was spinning. Just 2 hours ago, she'd been invisible. A nobody. Someone just trying to get through another shift so she could pay another bill. Now she was being offered her dream back, wrapped in a bow, handed to her by people she'd only seen on magazine covers. She started, then stopped. She thought about her mother, who was recovering but still needed care. She thought about her tiny apartment in Queens, where the heating barely worked and the neighbors were too loud. She thought about the degree she'd abandoned, the career she'd given up, the future she'd mourned. And then she thought about 6 words she'd whispered to a billionaire. 6 words that had taken every ounce of courage she possessed. Yes, Lily said, her voice strong and clear. Yes to all of it. Daniel stood and extended his hand. Not the handshake of a boss and an employee, but the handshake of equals. Partners. 2 people who had learned something valuable from each other on a rainy Tuesday night in Manhattan. As they shook hands, the room erupted in applause. The engineers who had been frantically working on laptops looked up and clapped. The Yamamoto brothers nodded with approval. Even the assistant who had mocked her earlier was clapping, his face red with shame. But the loudest applause came from an unexpected source. By the door, still holding her empty water pitcher, was the catering manager. She was smiling, so wide her face looked like it might split in half. She gave Lily a thumbs up and mouthed the words, "You go, girl." Lily laughed through her tears. Nothing in her entire life had prepared her for this moment. Not her years of studying. Not her months of struggle. Not anything. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need in the most unexpected way possible. All because you found the courage to speak up. 6 months later, Lily stood on a hillside in Bali, watching the sun rise over the construction site of the first Carter Global Eco-Resort. But this wasn't the resort that almost was. This was something better. Something stronger. Something built on truth instead of pride. The foundation piers were different now. Deeper, wider, strategically placed to handle the weight of water-saturated bamboo during monsoon season. The bamboo itself came from a sustainable farm that harvested during the dry season, ensuring optimal structural integrity. Every beam, every support, every calculation had been triple-checked by a team that now included specialists in tropical construction. And leading that team was Lily Zhang, who was no longer a server, no longer a dropout, no longer someone whose dreams had to wait for someday. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw your interview on the news last night. My famous daughter, the engineer. Dad would be so proud." Lily smiled, tucking the phone back into her pocket. Her mother's cancer remained in remission. Her father, who had passed when she was young, would indeed have been proud. But more than that, Lily was proud of herself. Daniel walked up beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He'd been there almost as much as she had over the past 6 months, insisting on understanding every detail of the construction process. The arrogant billionaire who thought he knew everything had transformed into a man who asked questions, who listened, who admitted when he didn't understand something. "The Yamamoto brothers are flying in this afternoon," Daniel said, handing her a coffee. "They want to see the progress before we start on the second resort in Thailand." "We're ahead of schedule," Lily replied, sipping the coffee gratefully. The monsoon season starts in 3 weeks, and we'll be ready. This resort will stand for 100 years. Daniel smiled. I've been thinking about that night. About how close I came to making the biggest mistake of my career. If you hadn't spoken up. But I did, Lily interrupted gently. That's what matters. Why did you? Daniel asked suddenly. Really, why? You could have lost your job. You could have been humiliated in front of a room full of powerful people. What made you do it? Lily thought about this for a long moment, watching the construction workers begin their day. My mother, she finally said. When I was growing up, she used to clean houses for rich families. She'd come home exhausted, her hands raw from chemicals, her back aching. And I'd ask her why she worked so hard for people who barely even looked at her. She turned to Daniel, her eyes clear and bright. And she'd tell me, just because they don't see me doesn't mean I don't matter. Just because I'm invisible doesn't mean I don't have value. And if I see something wrong, I speak up because staying silent makes me part of the problem. She taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Daniel nodded slowly. She sounds like an incredible woman. She is, Lily said. And she's the reason I couldn't stay quiet that night. Because somewhere in the future, families would have stayed in those resorts. Children would have played in those buildings. And if something had happened, if they had collapsed in a storm because I saw the problem and said nothing. She shook her head. I couldn't live with that. Over the next few hours, as they toured the construction site, Lily explained the various innovations they'd incorporated. Solar panels that could handle tropical humidity. Rainwater collection systems that would provide all the water the resort needed. Natural cooling systems that reduced the need for air conditioning by 60%. But more than the technical achievements, what made Lily proudest was the people. Daniel had taken her philosophy to heart. The construction team included local workers who were being trained in sustainable building techniques they could take back to their communities. The resort would employ people from the surrounding villages, paying fair wages and providing education opportunities for their children. This wasn't just a building project. It was a ripple effect. One moment of courage on a rainy night in Manhattan had grown into something that would touch hundreds of lives across the world. When the Yamamoto brothers arrived that afternoon, they toured the site with obvious satisfaction. The older brother pulled Lily aside as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Miss Zhang, he said through his translator, in our country we have a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. It teaches people to conform, to not stand out, to stay quiet. Lily nodded, unsure where this was going. But, he continued, a smile spreading across his weathered face, I think this saying is sometimes wrong. Sometimes the nail that sticks up is the only thing holding the whole structure together. You were brave enough to stick up, and because of that, we are building something that will last. Something that will keep people safe. Something that honors both progress and wisdom. He bowed deeply to her, a gesture of profound respect. Thank you for your courage. As the Yamamoto brothers left for their hotel, as the sun dipped below the horizon, as the construction site grew quiet for the evening, Lily stood with Daniel on that hillside and thought about the incredible journey of the past 6 months. She'd completed her master's degree, graduating top of her class. She'd been featured in engineering magazines as a rising star in sustainable development. She'd helped design 3 more resorts that would be built across Asia. But more than any of that, she'd learned something valuable about herself. You know what the best part of all this is? Lily said to Daniel. What's that? I'm not invisible anymore. Not because I'm wearing a different uniform or because I have a fancy title, but because I finally believe that I deserve to be seen. Daniel smiled. You were never invisible, Lily. You were just waiting for your moment. And when it came, you didn't waste it. As they walked back to their cars, Lily thought about all the other people out there like her. The servers and janitors and delivery drivers and retail workers who had knowledge, who had wisdom, who had things worth saying but felt like no one would listen. She thought about all the mistakes that could be prevented, all the disasters that could be avoided, if only people felt safe speaking up. She made a promise to herself then. She would use her platform, her success, her story to encourage others to find their voice. To remind them that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit. That wisdom doesn't always come with a degree. That sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else has overlooked. 3 years later, Lily launched a foundation that provided scholarships for students who had to leave school to care for family members. The foundation was called The Courage to Speak, and it helped hundreds of young people finish their education while supporting their loved ones. Daniel sat on the foundation's board, and at the launch event, he told the story of a rainy night in Manhattan, a $120 million deal, and 6 words whispered by a waitress that changed everything. "I thought I was the most important person in that room," Daniel said to the crowd. "I thought success meant having all the answers. But Lily taught me that true wisdom is knowing when to listen. True courage is speaking up even when you're afraid. And true leadership is recognizing brilliance wherever it appears, even if it's wearing an apron and pouring your water." The crowd erupted in applause, but Lily barely heard it. She was thinking about her mother, who sat in the front row, healthy and strong and beaming with pride. She was thinking about all the students who would get second chances, because someone had given her one. She was thinking about how one moment of courage can change not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. And she was thinking about the most important lesson she'd learned. Your voice matters. Your knowledge matters. You matter. Even when the world tries to tell you otherwise, especially when the world tries to tell you otherwise, you have to find the courage to speak up. Because you never know when your 6 words might change everything.